Hey guys, my name is Matt Pennicuff, and welcome to my presentation about Coca-Cola in regards to chapters 14 and 15 of our book, Customer Relationships and Marketing Research. So for my presentation, I divided up into two main parts based upon the chapters, with chapter 14 being about why do companies care about customer satisfaction and customer relationships. For all of us here, all of us who are going for MBAs, that's pretty self-explanatory, at least in my mind. A company cares about the relationship with customers and their satisfaction because that directly translates into their position and their sales. Especially for a good like Coca-Cola, which has competitors like Pepsi and other soft drink makers, you want to be able to respond to customers' needs and have a good rapport with them in order to maintain a viable market strategy. But for Coke specifically, one of the big things I brought from that or got out of this chapter was the importance of maintaining an expectation and experience. So for Coke, especially when you look at a lot of their marketing, and we're going to focus mainly on marketing this time, for in terms of quality control for a product like Coke, it's pretty standardized. 99 out of 100 Cokes are going to be identical, but it's important to maintain that, and they do investment in that. But the main point that I got from this chapter is, in terms of at least marketing, the expectation they set with their marketing and then the experience they receive on the customer end. So when you look at an advertisement of Coke, you often get the best of it, right? So you're looking at the optimal moment for Coke. You are trying to convey the taste. It's cold, it's carbonated. I always found it very interesting when I went to movie theaters, especially those like AMC, which have a partnership with Coke, that all their advertisements on the big screen are in glasses. They're not in the cheap plastic cups. They're trying to convey an experience. And at least in terms of a lot of their marketing, it's often portrayed as something that's exciting and enjoyable. And that expectation, at least when they provide it to individuals, is not only to draw people in, it's to set sort of a psychological attachment to the product. And when it comes to relating to customer satisfaction, if they have this set idea of what a Coke is and it doesn't, and that experience doesn't meet that expectation, that could detrimentally affect satisfaction and thus also the relationship with the product and the company. So again, when we have an expectation of a product, at least in terms of Coke, you have two main things. The one point that we're not going to talk about very much would be measuring quality, at least in terms of the physical product, right? So when it comes to Coke, again, it's a very standardized product that has a lot of control checkpoints and a lot of testing and a lot of ways to make sure that the product from manufacturer to store is identical for each individual. So the experience ideally should be the same for every individual. So I didn't really want to focus very much on this and as much as terms as the expectation. And what I mean by expectation is the expectation of the assumption of how you're going to feel when you use the product, mainly the main point they're conveying during a lot of their advertisements, the advertisement of commentation of a good time of a good product. So how do you measure that? In short, at least in terms of the chapter, it goes quite heavily over surveying, which we will go over more detail on the second part of this in terms of research tools. But companies like Coke want to know how you feel about their product, so at least they outsource this to companies who do surveys, who talk to providers in various populations to see how their experience with the product is. And this is very important in terms of when you're measuring satisfaction, especially for a company as large as Coke, who deals with multiple markets with multiple population types. Satisfaction can vary quite dramatically from population to population. In America, certain products and offerings that they have here aren't necessarily a good fit for something like Indonesia, who has completely different cultural tastes and cultural expectations. In addition, at least in terms of their marketing, you really probably don't want to do a Christmas-styled marketing campaign in a country like India, who doesn't traditionally, or at least in terms of culturally, celebrate the holiday. So surveys are a very important tool to kind of get an idea of what the population is looking for and gives an idea for the company in terms of how they want to react. So that kind of leads us into our next topic, which we can really kind of sink our teeth into, and that's CRM, or Customer Relationship Management. This is kind of, for lack of a better word, a balancing act. Going back to the Coke format, Coke wants to provide you with a satisfaction in terms of a price point, in terms of the offering of beverages they have, and at the same time they want to turn a profit. So CRM is really kind of trying to get that balancing act in terms of turning satisfaction into loyalty in sales, but also making sure those sales are measurable in terms of bringing those into a measurable metric that they can present to individuals to change the marketing campaign or have alterations in terms of price or product offerings. In the book, they kind of go over the first CRM was kind of a loyalty card program. At least here at IU, they had quite a bit of things where if you go to Starbucks, and I don't drink Starbucks, so take this with a grain of salt, you buy 9 coffees, you get the 10th one free, right? So they're trying to inspire loyalty in regards to, if you keep purchasing our products or repeat purchases, we will reward you. And that's kind of how they built loyalty traditionally. And then it kind of goes on to talk about how modern companies, and I think Coke is very indicative of this trend, really more rely on their brand power in terms of their market control and their market share, and less on those traditional value propositions. But that's kind of an important point for CRM. CRM also has a really important part in the customer lifetime value, right? So one of those metrics that they like to be able to convert sales into is lifetime value. How much money can you get from someone by ensuring their loyalty to the brand is there? And in terms of Coca-Cola, there's really 2 big points of this. There's acquisition and retention. Acquisition, getting people involved with the Coke brand, involves 2 main things. The fact that they have a whole host of different kinds of beverages, ranging from juice to energy drinks to soda to sparkling water, that kind of captures a large market share that can pull them into the brand, right? And then on top of that, if you've been to a lot of restaurants, certain restaurants, most restaurants only sell either Coke or Pepsi, right? So Coca-Cola has taken the initiative to buy out either the companies outright, or at least their soda rights, air quote, to provide them with more market share in places for where individuals are either forced to try their product or only have the offerings of their product. So on top of that, you have the acquisition plan. You want to keep those people, right? So that's kind of where the lifetime value comes in. So you can bring people in with acquisition, but then you want to keep them. And again, that kind of comes back to their large selection of beverages. People's taste changes with age. An individual who was 5 who loves juice, once they hit college, is going to have different sets of needs and different sets of wants in a product, and they're going to change from juice to something like an energy drink, something like soda that provides them with little caffeine, because they have different needs. So retention is that ability that they have this large beverage swath to choose from, and on top of that, they're always coming up with new beverages to respond to customers' needs. This keeps the customer loyal to the brand in regards that they're always going to have a product or offering that entices them to stick with the brand. So for chapter 14, this is really encompassing a lot of the issues Coke has and a lot of the objective Coke has in terms of customer satisfaction and customer relationships. And then we go into chapter 15, which talks about marketing research. I found this chapter, the previous chapter was already fairly difficult to tie into Coke, but I found this chapter specifically hard to tie into Coke because Coke doesn't expressly say which marketing tools they specifically use. So chapter 15 outlines 6 main marketing tools. And what I've tried to do in terms of tie it into Coke is I've tied it to potential examples with an actual offering they have, which is Coca-Cola coffee. In a lot of Asian countries, particularly in Malaysia and Indonesia, coffee with Coke has been a popular drink for a few decades, at least of what I have read. And they've actually started offering it pre-made in a can. So for what I've tried to do for this chapter is for these 6 tools: clustering analysis, focus groups, scanner data, perceptual mapping, conjuncture of testing, and surveys for assessing. I've tried to come up with how Coke might be able to use each of these for the marketing research for this product in new markets. There are several things you could kind of use this analysis for, or at least this clustering analysis for, but that's just kind of one example for regards to Coffee Coke. The second one, perceptual mapping for positioning, is kind of interesting, and I can see very helpful in terms of trying to decide what to put into your product. So perceptual mapping, especially, we're going to focus mainly on the attribute-based. We'll touch on multidimensional at the end, but for Coke, for attribute-based, you're taking your product and you're comparing with other people's products and trying to determine what attributes of the product are both advantageous and I'm going to mispronounce this, not advantageous. We'll just skip that. So if you had, say, Coffee Coke was competing with a coffee beverage in Indonesia, and you compare your two products together, and you may have the better taste, but at the same time, the competitor company has a better can design / price point. And then you can use this kind of perceptual mapping to against kind of how valuable it is in the community to kind of get an idea of what's most valuable and kind of min-max your design and your product offering to best suit that market. Multi-dimensional scaling is a little more complicated, and I couldn't find any, excuse me, I couldn't think of any, at least off the cuff, any major uses for the example of Coke. But basically that compares and groups brands based on similarities, which requires interpretation by marketers to say why those brands are similar and what offering these similar brands have. The example in the book was cars and how like Fiat and Mini Cooper were similar, and they were similar and thus had value due to their identical, personality offerings. I couldn't find a very easily example for Coke, but there you go. So finally, thankfully for me, we're moving away from a little less computational, mathematical, kind of higher concept-based things, and we're moving on to something much more easily explainable. Focus groups for concept testing. This is, in my mind, probably the most easiest to explain, and I'm sure a lot of you guys already have an idea of what this is. So when you are trying to develop a product, you could have a focus group. So when you're going for, say, the coffee's working out well in Indonesia, you want to move to Malaysia, and you want to test the Malaysian market for this coffee product. You can set up a focus group which looks at the product and compares it with other brands in the area, and then they can come up with what they like and what they don't like about it and provide critical feedback for Coca-Cola to either change about the product or maybe even abandon or rework entire aspects. It's kind of the most easiest to understand, but it's very important in terms of when you're in the development stage of it. So next we have conjoint testing for attributes. Basically, I like to think of this as diminishing returns. So when you're thinking about Coke, when Coke's trying to release a new product, they can offer various services. You could have the Coke with... The book kind of goes into this bell and whistle kind of idea, where if you have a product that has everything you could possibly want onto it, it's not really affordable, right? So if Coca-Cola produced a can that was made out of high-end materials that had really high-cost graphics on it, on top of lots of additional flavorings and all this other stuff, the bells and whistles version, it loses its cost value, right? Because you're putting so much money into the can that it may not warrant the current offering. So when conjoint for testing, it's kind of like offering various permutations of the product and trying to find that sweet spot between offering and value. So the book kind of goes into like an offering for a site. Maybe they have different services in terms of like weekly updates, online checkout. What is really valuable to the customer and what generates that value that brings them back to your product. That's kind of a very rough idea for what conjoint for testing attributes is. So what happens what kind of data can you use for when you release the product into the market? And that moves us on to scanner data. So scanner data is exactly what it sounds like. It basically measures how much you buy, at what price point you buy, and when you bought it. For something like the release of any kind of product from Coca-Cola, but going to our example of Coke coffee, when they release it, they may want to know, are people just buying one or are they buying an entire case? Are they using coupons or special offerings for promotions when they first release it? And when are they buying it? Is it particular in the morning? Is it particular in the evening? These are factors that could be used by the marketing teams in terms of creating a new marketing mix to attract segments of the population that haven't either tried it or are more willing to become repurchasers. And it can be invaluable for the creation of new strategies. For example, a lot of your testing may say a certain product has good foundations for release into a market, but perhaps the scanner data shows otherwise, and maybe you need to change your forecast or change the product fundamentally to better address the needs of the people. And then lastly, one tool that we've talked about quite a bit and that are involved with several other of the tools we've talked about before, such as cluster marketing, would be surveys, right? So the act of creating a survey requires a bit of finesse. The book goes into it quite a bit because you need to be able to ask the right questions succinctly enough to be able to draw from to create good answers or good suggestions for the product and for the company to move forward with. It's also probably the easiest way for customers to directly give their suggestions and give their feedback to the company in terms of barrier to entry. This survey branch of marketing is kind of taken off quite a bit. I know Coca-Cola outsources a lot of their surveys and a lot of their market research to Salesforce, which handles a lot of surveying for a lot of large companies. And in terms for Coffee Coke, this could be very useful for something like after launch, so you can tell if people are enjoying certain aspects of it, or again, another way to know what they might want to tweak a little bit or what they might want to change or what's great. And that's the conclusion of this presentation. This was a harder one than my last one. I hope I was able to provide enough information for you guys, at least through the outlook of, or through the lens of this chapter, to kind of give you guys something. Was not my easiest thing. But thank you for listening. My name is Matt Pennicuff, and good luck.